Hello, everybody, and welcome to March 13th edition of the Gateway API meeting. As usual, this is governed by the Kubernetes Code of Conduct, which boils down to please be nice to one another. We are trying to do the attendees list for these meetings because we're trying to figure out alternate times and stuff like that. And we want to know who's attending what. So if you would please put your name and company down on the document under attendees, we would appreciate that. All right, I should probably share my screen here. Okay. Can everybody see my screen just fine? Let me know if I need to zoom.
Yep.
All right, then let's get started with the agenda. We do have a little bit of an agenda today, but anybody here that's new, I don't see anybody, but if you have something on your mind, please do add it to the agenda. If we can't get it to it today, we can always try and do it next week. Candace, I think comment from Rob from January 23rd. Ingress focus config filter. Do you want to go ahead and talk about that, Candace?
Yes, I think I've been talking to somebody. I think it's someone whose name starts with a D, Dan or Dave, about what was happening with the GEP 1282, and which we had closed, but we were all still interested in TLS re-encrypt, amongst other things described in that document. So I went back and realized that I was supposed to be working on something that I forgot about. So I started working on it. I re-listened to the January 23rd discussion of this, and I tried to make it true to that discussion. I can't share it with everybody in this group, but I did share it with the maintainers. And I wanted to see if you guys are good to go ahead, and are we good to go ahead with a GEP for this? And this is based on filters, which I'm not 100% familiar with, but I just used the API and cut and paste a few things from GEP 1282 to specify this. And maybe I can share my screen, or one of you, or Shane, if you have the link to the doc, if you want to share your screen.
Either way, I made you co-host, so if you want to go ahead and share, you can do that, or I can do it.
Okay, I can share, so you can have a break. I don't know, how much time do you want to let me have for this? Should be quick, hopefully.
Yeah, let's look at the agenda real quick. I think if you can keep it down to like 15 minutes, we'll be good.
Yeah, I think I could do that. So you can probably see the gateway data plane for Ingress.
Holy tabs. So
Yeah.
No, you can't see that.
I just see the meeting notes. I think we're
notes.
seeing the full screen, but right now the window that's most prominent is the meeting notes one.
I've shared the wrong screen, so I will share the right one. Yeah, that's nothing, that tab list, Shane.
Yeah, I was like, oh my goodness. I don't know if I've ever had that many tabs open at once.
Oh, you're lucky.
By the way, Bowie in the chat did say he's not super fond of his exact words. It would help to not call it re-encrypt. Just
yes, I think that's used very rarely in this document.
Roger that. Go ahead. Sorry.
Okay, so going back, I think it was Rob and Nick that recommended using the term gateway data plane for Ingress. I think I have that right. If I haven't exactly gotten that right, please let me know. This is specifically whittled down to a very small use case having to do with Ingress TLS on the gateway data plane, and it explicitly excludes service mesh and the TLS route use cases, even though it's talking about TLS for another use case. So the goals, I think if we just go over the goals and non-goals, we could probably come up with some questions and feedback based on that. So this is what I just mentioned, Ingress TLS on the gateway data plane. And this is probably the most explanatory sentence. What we want to do with this is to satisfy the use case where the backend pod has its own certificate and the gateway implementation client, the gateway implementations client needs to know how to connect to the backend pod. And these last two bullets are from the previous GEP. Also needs to be tightly bound to the backend rather than the route. And the service owner is the application developer. In the personas, service owner should control the Ingress TLS settings, not the owner of the gateway implementation. Non-goals, as I mentioned already, are service mesh use cases and TLS route use cases. Is that pretty clear so far?
Pretty clear. The top goal doesn't seem necessary in the face of the second goal, perhaps.
Okay.
But that's really
get rid of that.
The service owner part makes sense to me, but in this doc, have we like kind of fleshed out why? Is that down in the introduction somewhere, the why? Like what this is used for? Because at least at the top, like in the TLDR and stuff like that, the why might be like clear to some of us, but I'm not sure it would be clear to just any reader that came in here.
Okay.
Again, not a huge deal, but just something to throw in there.
So this part maybe needs a little bit more explanation.
Maybe. But I think all I was going to say is just like the why you're trying to do something, like as soon as you can tell somebody why you want to do something, do it. I mean, sometimes you have to get really involved and do like user stories and stuff like that, but I think the why for this is fairly straightforward.
I think it would help, especially in this case, because there's some, it feels like, design around a particular usage ownership model, and that it would help to understand how that comes about.
Yes, and please. Thank you, Candace.
Usage ownership model. Okay. All right. So there's not all that much more to it than this. So I want to say, just for the benefit of the people who haven't, sorry, so I should go back and say that we're basing this on the gap that was closed because it was too generic. And this second one here is the original issue, which is what I was calling re-encrypt, which also can be called upstream TLS, or what's the third thing that we wanted to call it, that didn't have to do with which direction it was going in. Anyways, there was another, it's a very confusing terminology, but it's what happens from the gateway to the backend pod when you need to run TLS and you need to figure out how you're going to connect to a pod that has its own certificate, which is not defined in Gateway API at the moment. And I also wanted to mention that this discussion issue itself references 7 other issues that we've opened and closed or kept open over the last couple of years as well. So this is just something that keeps going round and around, and I feel like this is I'm trying really hard to whittle it down here, so it may look very, very basic and very bare bones, and I'm willing to fill in if needed, but just having the references back to these may fill in more details. So anyways, given all that background for it, the situation that we find ourselves in is that currently the only things that are specified, the only termination types that are specified are edge termination types for HTTP route and pass-through termination types for TLS route. What's missing in our opinion, in my team's opinion, and lots of those other 17 issues, is the way to handle TLS from the gateway to the backend pod, and that should sound familiar based on what we've talked about so far. So here again is the use case. We're satisfying the use case where the backend pod has its own certificate, and the gateway client needs to know how to connect to the backend pod. So the last discussion that we had around this in January was exploring the use of the HTTP backend ref, HTTP route filter extension point. And just correct me if I'm using the wrong vocabulary for some of these things. My first exploration of this area of the API. So, and this is just straight from the API documentation. Filters can be used to specify additional processing steps. And there are other filter types already implemented that help with request to response modification, and authentication strategies, rate limiting, traffic shaping, and that is basically what the filter is there for. It's under the rule for an HTTP route, and closely tied to the backend and under the backend ref, if I have that right. So in this case, we already have a bunch of HTTP route filters, and this would be adding a new one called a TLS filter to the HTTP route filter listing. Just defines a schema, and for information that helps figure out the TLS connection, helps the client figure out the TLS connection and how to use it. And the fields that I am supplying for the TLS filter are copied from the old GEP that was closed. The old GEP being too generic, but too specific in this area. So I pulled these fields from the old GEP and created a TLS filter struct. And this just has like the TLS version, min and max, cipher suites, CA certs, and service names. So this is an example for, this is the last of this, an example for just a generic service. And then, so this is how we would do this, how we would specify this within the HTTP route. Shane, do you have your hand up?
Oh, go ahead and finish, and then as soon as you're ready. Yeah.
Okay. So within the HTTP route spec, we have the rules, the backend ref. I think I have this right. I might be doing this wrong. Someone will correct me, I think. And under the backend ref, we have tied to it this filter. This new filter's name is TLS filter, and it has the fields that I mentioned above in this section. So that's a very brief overview. And does anybody have questions? Shane, I think you're muted.
Yeah, I did mute myself. All right. No questions. I have like a comment. So I think it's good that you're pushing for this, and thank you for sharing the doc and so forth. I think that why is going to be really important to tease out. And then I would suggest, even though it might seem a little bit more cumbersome, because I could see there being some contention in the, just the overall idea here, I would suggest putting down the gap after you get the why teased out, and somewhere between the TLDR, the goals, non-goals, and maybe the introduction, you kind of have that pretty clear and up front. Leaving out all the implementation details and just putting in a PR to get at, so we can just get an inventory of everybody. Like, does everybody see the use case for this? Do other people need this? That kind of thing, and get that figured out first, and then follow it up with the how, which is like the spec and stuff that's going on here. Because it's possible we might not. It's possible even in the process of talking with other community members about the why and like wanting to do this, that that might help influence the how. So that's just my kind of advice about how to move forward. But I do think you should move it forward. You should definitely take this and go into GEP with it, but with that kind of just the what and the why start, if that makes sense.
Okay. Well, to be honest, I understand the need for the why here, maybe a little bit more elaboration on the why, because I only pretty much summed it up in here. But as I mentioned, this issue already has 7 other very fully referenced, spec'd out, reviewed issues. The only reason it hasn't so far, I mean, I feel like we have enough support already, rather than having to start from the very bottom with this PR, just because it's been batted around for so long.
I gotcha. I'm open to your intuition on that. If you really feel like it should just as is basically go, I think you're ready to like take it to actual GEP. But if you think that, you know, you've got the support and stuff like that, then ignore me. I just think that it might be helpful, because even now I just feel like there's potentially, anyway, I'm going to take up too much time, but that was just my thought. Go ahead, Howard. John.
I think it was Bowie's next.
Yeah, Bowie, you can go.
Go ahead, Bowie.
Yeah, I'm curious because it says here the service owner should control, but then your config is on the route. So does that match with what you want?
Isn't it the same persona that would be the service owner and the route?
I think, yeah, in general, we've assumed that the HTTP route owner is the same as the service owner in most cases. Don't know if we've ever made that explicit anyway, though.
Okay, I could make it more obvious what I'm trying to say here.
Yeah, to me, that's my biggest hangup as well. I mean, if I have my backend and I have 10 routes pointing to it, do I want to configure the TLS settings on all 10 routes, or do I want to put them next to the service, right?
So, yeah, I mean, that was my thinking originally, and that was why we said, oh, let's have a separate resource, and then that blew up into a big thing. So this is Candace trying to so find some minimal set of functionality that we can talk about. So this is one of the things I think, Candace, where Shane's point about talking about the where and the why. I mean, the essential change here that's different to what we talked about before is, rather than decorating like the service resource and having some sort of wrapper or some addition onto the service resource, we're adding a filter into the route resource. So it's a slightly different focus. It's a slight and the thing that's different is that, yeah, as John says, then you'll need to specify. So the downside of doing a filter is that you have to specify it in every place you refer to the service. So I think that's the trade-off of doing this. So I think that's probably the thing that's probably worth considering doing what Shane is talking about, and sort of putting in the goals in the introduction and sort of saying, hey, we want to do this with a filter because we tried to do it before with something more fancy and it didn't go anywhere. And we want to get this moving. And then we can talk about, and then we can talk on that PR and sort of decide if the filter is the right approach, or if we should do something that's, that, as John says, is more sort of per service rather than per route. I think that's definitely the trade-off of the filter approach. But yeah, I think that I would certainly like to see us do something rather than continuing to argue about which thing is better. Yeah, Bowie.
Yeah, stepping back a bit, I think like I have seen like different use cases. Like, for example, I want to talk to TLS, but I'm not necessarily super opinionated. And then there is the service owner saying, you should talk to me in using TLS. You know, that's my protocol I'm using. And then there is MTLS, of course, that's like a big one.
So-
And then there is also the server wants to control the CA and doesn't want to just trust anything that's coming in. It's like, I don't know if we can make a choice there and say only a few of those paths are actually supported. But that's my general take, is like, we need to look at all those cases and see
There is actually a
if it's
TLS use
possible to
case.
do them all.
Bowie, there's already a TLS use cases doc that we've been adding to for some time. Let me just see if I can find it.
Right, like I don't know if we pare down or we put a, like, yes this, no this, yes this, but
Yeah, we haven't really. I think Candace has definitely sort of done a pretty good job of making it clear that, forgive me if I'm putting words in your mouth here, but that you're definitely very interested in handling this most simple use case first. Like, you know, you haven't said explicitly, but my gut feeling is that you have some customers who are like, I would like to be able to do this, please, and I cannot. I certainly have had that sort of thing happen in the past. And so, you know, I definitely want us to do it right. But also at the moment, we have been talking about this for over a year. And we haven't done anything because we've been a bit paralyzed by, but we need to address all of the use cases. And so I'm kind of in favor of us doing something and trying it out, putting in experimental if we need to, over continuing to just sort of ensure that the thing that we can do can handle every possible use case.
I agree with the spirit of trying to get something that's experimental, at least, that we can start to experiment with. Like pushing for that as the next big step and not letting this get stuck too much longer.
Sorry to sort of take over your session a little bit, Candace.
so
No.
I asked if you can put me on the doc. I just have a couple questions, but I don't want to, you know, burn up all the time here discussing it.
Yeah, there's going to be a lot of discussion on this, I think. So we're getting close to 30 minutes, so we should probably, as much as possible, take that async. If the doc can't be, I put a comment on this in the chat, but if the doc can't be shared, I think now is a great time to just start gepping it, so we can start doing that. Go ahead, Rob.
Yeah, I mean, if there's a way to pull this out, that I know a lot of us will like have a personal account that we share everything from because our work accounts don't let us share everywhere. That's one potential workaround. Whatever you do, yes, I agree that this needs more discussion, and I'd love to move forward with something here. One of the things that, you know, it may be too early on for this, but one of the things I'd really like to have in a gap would be an alternatives considered. Just, you know, I know we've gone through a few different iterations of this, and I'd love to at least document why we are using a policy, a filter, as opposed to a, you know, policy or something like that. So I know we're at time, so I don't want to keep on talking here, but I'll add some follow-up comments on the doc itself. Thanks for taking this on.
My only
and for the, go ahead. Yeah.
Oh, no, go ahead.
No, it's fine.
I just wanted to ask whether it would be okay to go ahead and put this up as a PR, so that, you know, rather than having people comment on the Google Doc at this stage.
I think it's reasonable. My only fear is that this feels like something that could end up with, you know, 100 comments or something like that becomes really hard to, you know, sometimes when we see something that feels like it's going to have a ton of comments, it's helpful to get the first round of them out in a doc and then have round two in a PR, because if you start to have a PR with hundreds of comments, it just becomes a pain to deal with. Same with a doc, but this just kind of splits it up a little bit.
That was
it's not
my
a
point
firm
with
requirement.
But yeah, it's kind of up to you, but that was kind of my point with like maybe making just part of it into the GEP at first, because that narrows what we can actually talk about down to something that's a little bit more reasonable for a PR, and might may allow us to just get that solved, the one thing, not end up with 4 different comment threads, get that merged so that then you have a provisional gap. It's real, it exists, and we can move forward with it with other smaller PRs. But that's again my preference. So it's kind of up to you. I'm going to reach out to you on Kubernetes Slack, and just I'm going to try to be available to you to like support you in whatever way I can to help push this forward, because I know that you're tired of this being stuck. So
I just hope I'm not the only one who's tired of that, because it feels.
I am absolutely extremely tired of this being stuck, Candace. I would really like to get some movement here. Yeah, and so like I think it's one of those things. It really feels to me like this is just one of those things where it really runs up against one of those places where the language that everyone uses is subtly different between people, and no one realizes until you start trying to write a spec. And so that's why I think we just got to be super careful with language and exactly the use cases we're trying to hit, and the things that we are trying to do, and the things that we are not trying to do with this.
Okay.
And the trade-offs that we are making in order to do that. Those are the things that I think we need to be super clear about.
Okay. Thanks, everyone. Thanks for your encouragement. I will keep going.
thank you. We really appreciate it. All right, moving on to the next topic. I'm not sharing, am I? One sec. Okay. All right. Rob and I want to talk about upcoming releases. So V062 is going to be another small patch release, just mostly focused on us releasing more often and not taking forever to do releases. So the exercise of that causes learning, and also it's just generally a good exercise. I was intending to do it today, but my backlog was so huge I haven't gotten to it yet. So I believe you'll see that tomorrow. And then Rob, you want to talk about V070?
Yeah, so I also want just one more thing on 062. Thank you to Shane. I think you're the one who's been adding milestones retroactively to bug fixes or other things, new conformance tests that we believe belong in the 062 milestone, and then just manually cherry picking them prior to release. So if you have a PR or something that is in the V062 milestone, rest assured that it's going to be in that release. If not, and
If
you
it's
think it should be, yeah.
If it's not merged, it's getting bumped.
Yes, well said. So if it's merged and in that milestone, it's going to be in the release. If not, we're going to clear the milestone. If you see something in the next, please let us know in the next few hours, really. But if you see something that feels like it really should be cherry picked and it hasn't been, or it's not part of the milestone, definitely reach out to us. Yeah, that's all. So 070 release, really also trying to get that out soon. The age-old thing, we try and release before KubeCon in this case. And in this case, I think the major changes I'd like to get in are the path redirects and rewrites gap, graduating that through to standard channel. There's a couple other bigger things in here, but as you can see by the size of this milestone, we're going to have to pull a lot of things out of this milestone. Given our relatively limited time, I don't know that we're going to be able to do the triage. Maybe we can come back to this if we have time at the end. But this milestone is far larger than we can possibly fit in the next few weeks. So we do want to get 070 out. It's just need to be very targeted about what we want to include. If you see something on there and you're assigned to it, maybe comment if you think you're going to be able to get there in the next couple of weeks. And if not, we'll just pull it from the, and lack of comment will just lead us to assume it's not going to get in the next couple of weeks. Yeah, and Shane, you've got, this is a good transition it into your project board. Yeah, have at it.
This is, oh, sorry. Yeah, I just started doing that. I apologize. I should tell you what I was doing. I just wanted to take a look at it on the board. So yeah, we have all of these things in progress, 7 things that are not. I'm not sure everything is. We'll have to double check on some of these to make sure they're all actually in progress. But definitely seems like we'll have to do that. So in general, as these releases come up, do kind of be loud about things that you feel need to land sooner rather than later. We'll listen. So, okay. Yep. Redirects, policy attachment, timeout seems like, so the timeout one to me,
It seems pretty
like one
unlikely.
unlikely, but the sooner we can start getting feedback on that.
So
Yeah, I mean,
yeah,
it
so
seems
the timeouts one is really gated behind the policy attachment update. And but I think that there are 2 candidate timeouts that the review that I did has confirmed we should be able to do that are pretty broadly implementable. So I think that we can add a timeout policy with 2 like broadly implementable timeouts that will mean whatever the hell we define them to mean, but that should be implementable by most of the data planes. So I think it is conceivable that we could have that in experimental in the Gateway API by the time we do it, if the policy attachment one goes through in the next few days.
yeah,
multiple times.
And I wanted to, I think I actually meant to write, but I must have had timeouts on the mind, but also the retries one is one that feels somewhat straightforward, somewhat. We'll see. I don't know if it's gonna fit in or not. Someone has assigned themselves to work on it. We'll see if it fits or not. Okay, so that's all the things, but please, maybe we can open up a few to anyone here. If you see something that is missing from either of these releases, don't hesitate to chime in on this meeting, in chat, in Slack, wherever. We don't want to leave things out unnecessarily, but we are, as Shane mentioned, trying to get to a fast release cadence, so it's less painful to miss release if you do.
Yeah, that's the big thing right now, and we're kind of starting. We're on our way. Cool. I didn't see any raised hands, so we'll move on. Rob, you wanted to talk about the Contributor Summit.
Yeah, this is a really quick one. I don't know how many people are going to be able to make it to Contrib Summit. Maybe show like raised hands or something, reactions, whatever. But if you're going to be able to make it, we would love to meet, have some kind of gateway related session. There's a CFP for Contrib Summit that is open now. I linked to it. Anyone is welcome to submit something there. I've been thinking about, conformance, having one, trying to think about who's going to be there and what's going to be most valuable. And the idea of trying to do things that cross SIG boundaries feels really potentially helpful. So trying to move forward on conformance, which has a lot of overlap with SIG Arch, and reference grant, which is moving to SIG Auth. But open to any other ideas out there, just trying to circulate that in case someone wanted to collaborate on something more. Contrib Summit is really awesome. If you are able to make it, it's just a great time to meet other contributors and brainstorm about what's next. Yeah. Okay. Go ahead.
Yeah, thanks. Sorry, I was just going to say, yeah, I'm definitely very supportive of the fact that that's a really good time for us to for us to sort of share some of the stuff we've learned over the last year, the last 6 months at least, with the rest of the Kubernetes community. And I think the stuff that we have been doing about conformance and reference grant and stuff like that are probably the ones that are most likely to be the most interesting to people who aren't directly interested in this one. I personally, I'd like to sort of try and avoid us just having a working meeting there, because although many people will be in the same place, but I don't think everyone will be there. So I feel like the best use of the time is to sort of expose Gateway API things to other people in the contributor community.
Yeah. Cool. All right, the next thing, I added a bunch of things on here, but the last thing for me for a while is redirect loop protection. There's a PR that kind of forced the issue a little bit, which is all caused by an issue I created actually. But there's been some ambiguity in the API right now as to if you can specify a redirect filter and a backend wrap as part of the same route rule and what happens. So Travis added, I think it was Travis added an issue that suggested, hey, could we add a concept of redirect loop protection? So if there's a redirect to say HTTPS and you're already at HTTPS, then just go through the rest of the rule and forward to the backend refs associated with it. So basically a way of requiring HTTPS for a given route and then having the backend refs associated with it at the same time. Doing some discussion and exploration, it feels like this could be challenging to implement, maybe impossible to implement universally, which leads me to the other option, which is that PR, which would essentially shut the door on that and just say you cannot ever have both a redirect filter and a backend ref in the same route rule. That's a direction I tend to lean towards, but it does shut the door on ever having some kind of redirect loop protection. Anyone have thoughts or preferences on this one?
And I think the loop protection sounds like a good idea. It does sound like it might be hard to implement, although we might be able to do something a little bit like the some of the changes I've kind of suggested in a couple of cases for the redirect things, where it's like where we have specifications about if the generated location header would be, then do this. So like right now, the thing that we have in there that you logged the issue that's actually a bit unclear. I did put a comment on the issue that you logged about that, but basically the idea here is that there's rules in there that are intending to say something like, if you're using HTTP and the redirect port comes out to be port 80, then don't include the port. Then you mustn't include the port. And so I think that if we were going to put something like what Travis proposed in, then the rules would have to sound like something like, if the location you're going to redirect to is the same as the one that you're at, then the redirect filter has completed successfully, and that don't redirect in that case, or something like that. As to whether or not you can actually do that in data planes, that's like that then becomes the interesting question. So yeah, I think that's I think there's a way that we can define the API to do it. It's whether or not you can actually do that in data planes is another interesting question. You go, Shane.
Kind of with Rob as far as like leaning towards just doing this, because if I'm not mistaken, this is a situation that we can grow from. We could just be like, nope, until somebody's like, but I need it to be yep, and then we can remove this and add something better later. So if there's like nobody that I think we can, right? We can take this, like if we have this validation in place and just says, nope, we can eventually remove that if we have something else in place that would protect them. So we can grow from here if we don't know anybody who's like, I need to not have, this is a problem for me, right? Am I thinking about it wrong?
Generally, it's okay to loosen validation, not to tighten it.
That's what I'm saying, right?
This one is a bit weird because it's kind of a different, you're sort of making it be a slightly different behavior. It's not just the validation.
Yeah, but you could have like implementations tell them one release in advance, go implement support for this, and then the next release we loosen the validation or something.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Not amazing, but
it can move forward. The speed at which it moved forward will probably not be like super high velocity, but it can if we needed to. So it's not like we're really screwing up if for some reason this break, like we'll take time. We won't just do this, I think, without making sure that we check in with a lot of people. But after that point, we're not messed up if somebody comes along later and is like, actually, because there will be, that's the other thing too. There will be new implementations coming down the road. So
Yeah, no, I to me, this feels like the best. Right now, we just have an ambiguous situation where it's unclear what should be done when both the redirect and backend ref are present. My preference, I think, would be to just move forward with this PR that we, at least in terms of webhook validation, prevents that from being the case. And we'd also need something in the spec that says these two things are not intended to coexist. And we still leave some room open, though it's unlikely. We leave some room open that we could open it back up to redirect loop protection, but that I don't know if we would get to that point. And I've lost some comments in chat, so I'll focus there. But again, my preference right now, without having read the comments, would be to just lock it down so that it's a little bit more clear to implementers and users what the intent is. I think anything like redirect loop protection is going to be complex at a minimum and likely not universally implementable.
Agreed from my end. Merge it. Got it. All right, done. Right here. We're doing it. No, just kidding. Okay. Yeah, so please do. It's 1788. Please do jump in there and, you know, throw out your comments if you got them. And we thank you for that. It is marked as draft, so actually I kind of missed this one. I don't usually read the ones that are draft unless somebody pings me. All right. Okay, so we talked about that. I have a little update on Blixt. We are getting to a point here where, as a part of the conformance profiles work that I'm doing with some members of the community, did I link the wrong issue? Somebody's changing something. Anyway,
Yes, you did. I fixed it.
cool. Thank you. Appreciate that. So we are getting to the point where the work on conformance profiles should kind of converge with getting UDP route conformance tests started. Now, they're not going to be like, it's probably not going to be the like laser lightning speed or anything, but fairly soon, I'm expecting in the next couple of weeks, you should start seeing some semblance of like layer 4 conformance tests starting. We'll see how that goes. It kind of depends on PR reviews and stuff like that, but just a heads up. And there's an issue on the Blix side for that. And then the other thing, this was kind of like just an interesting thing for those of you who are interested in eBPF. You might know that it's kind of hard today to manage your eBPF programs loaded in the kernel. In fact, for some solutions, like I think in Celium's case, and correct me if I'm wrong, Nick, it's kind of a situation where they're like, don't load anything else, load what we give you kind of thing. Keep it the sanity is, or sorry, the sanitization is handled that way. BPFD is a project that's coming along to try to provide like a manager for eBPF programs. And one of the cool things that it has is an operator with like an eBPF program resource, where you can literally just put your eBPF program bytecode in a container image, put it on that resource, and then it'll deploy it for you to all the nodes. It's kind of cool. We're going to use it in Blixt and get off of our Rust-based loader, although technically BPFD is Rust-based, but just because it'll make things easier for us, and then we can actually define our eBPF programs as manifests or as CRs, which is really cool. So if you're interested, there's an issue up on that. And that's all I have for updates on Blixt. Be looking out for the conformance test stuff coming hopefully sooner rather than later. Triage. Got 3 issues for triage today. We've got 10 minutes, so let's get some time to get started on them here. Okay, policy attachment update. Yeah, I just got back to this one actually, I think last week. There are a lot of comments on this bad boy. This is
I mean, I think it's pretty close now to a reasonably final version. There have been a couple of comments. Arco has mentioned that he'd prefer not to use a policy attachment for like TLS, and I'm like, okay, that's fine, but like I need to. If people really have a problem with policy attachment, we need to know, right? Like, and I know Arco, you've tried to have a crack at implementing policy attachment before. I think that it's been very under spec before, and part of what I'm trying to do with
You sure it's Arco? Because I'm not seeing him on here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I think Nick is just sharing. So Nick, I think policy attachment is great, and I think in Envoy Gateway we'll actually use it. We'll use direct policy attachment. I think for native fields like what Candace was talking about earlier, I think it would be great if it's part of the native API rather than an extension API like policy attachment.
So yeah, so I think part of what I'm trying to do by nailing down the language around policy attachment is to then have us be able to say there are some policies that are included in the native API. Timeout policy probably, and then if we were going to do TLS with a policy, then TLS would also be included. And so one of the things I want to do with policy attachment is to make this whole thing a little bit clearer by having a couple of examples in the sort of the at least the extended API. And so yeah, I think that's the that I'm kind of hoping that some examples will make it a bit clearer. The big change for this one is that I've changed. Previously, policy attachment was only the sort of the one where it flows over a hierarchy and you can attach a policy to a gateway and have it affect the routes underneath. That is now called hierarchical policy attachment. Name feedback welcome. I can't come up with, the sorts of names that we've been talking about are like indirect, tree, what was the other one, Rob? There was another one that you said that I liked better.
Inherited.
Inherit. Yeah, that's inherited might be better than hierarchical. Hierarchical is a real tricky one to type. And
I think I like hierarchical now, just to be evil.
Everyone's going to get really good about hierarchical. But yeah, so that's the idea here is that's the main distinction. John's had some great comments, and I've really dialed in on exactly what the difference between a policy and a hierarchical policy is, to summarize. And I think I've got this down to a very short summary. That's a policy is anything that includes the target ref struct. And a hierarchical policy is one that includes the target ref struct and one of or both of either the defaults or override standards. If you don't have defaults or overrides, then it is by definition a direct attached policy that will only affect the object that it references, and it won't sort of have effects outside of that. None of this solves the observability problem for policy attachment. But we need to figure out what the thing is that we're building first before we can even try to solve how people figure out what policy is applying where. Yeah, John.
Yeah, one question I have. So say I have a timeout policy, for example, and I say this is a direct policy. Well, I guess two questions. One, can a given CRD only be one or the other? I think the answer is yes, right?
Yes.
Okay. And the second question is, so, okay, I have timeout policy. It's direct policy. Yeah. What if, can I only allow that to attach to service, or can I attach it to service and HTTP route? And what does it mean if I attach it to multiple places, or is that not allowed?
Okay, so yeah, this feels like a thing that I need to explain more. So hierarchical policies can attach to anything in the hierarchy, right? So hierarchical policies that you could attach, say, timeout policy is a good example of one where you can attach it to, say, a gateway and be like, set defaults, and then say those defaults to apply to all HTTP route, all backends under all HTTP routes under the gateway.
Yeah.
However, or you can attach it to a HTTP route, in which case it applies to all backends under that HTTP route. Or you can attach it to a backend like a service and say it only applies to this service. But it's still a hierarchical policy, no matter how many objects it has under its remit. Does that make sense? There's still the hierarchy is still there. The hierarchy is still present, and you can attach it to any point in the hierarchy and have it affect everything below it. So I thank you. That's a good question that I need to explain a bit more. Yeah, so I'll make that a bit clearer. But so I think for timeout policy, the rough design I have in my head is that it would be a hierarchical policy. It would include defaults at least and maybe overrides. The overrides part might just include stuff like don't allow infinite. But yeah, I think that yeah, does that sort of answer your question a bit?
I think so, but what if I had said it was direct, but then I attached it to two different spots? Is that something that we should support and behaves a certain way, or is that illegal and you have to say it the policy, direct policies can only attach to one type.
Yeah, I think I'm not 100% sure. I think I need to think about it. But the intent is that direct attach policy should sort of affect a setting that you only want to change for sort of one thing, you know. So if you make a timeout policy that's direct attached, like it should probably specify in the policy, hey, this policy is intended to modify service.
Yeah.
And not and targeting something else that's not service is an error for this specific policy. That is not going to be something we're going to be able to do with validation. That is going to be a controller level, like an implementation.
Yeah, like, right, it's a status thing.
Yeah, exactly right. Yeah. And so I think I think for direct attach policies in my mind are things like, if we were to do the TLS properties with a policy, they would be a direct attach policy to a service. And you would say, okay, for this service, like anytime you're using the service, if the TLS properties, you should look for TLS properties, and if so, use the ones from the TLS property policy or whatever. That is essentially what we were trying to design with backend properties, but defined in a sort of more clear way. Backend properties was a little woolly, had too many, and it was too big. And so the other intent with policies, maybe actually this is the thing that I should put, is that policies should be tightly focused on a specific kind of setting. Don't make them don't make them too broad, don't make them too generic. They need to be very tightly focused on sort of a limited set of things. They're hard enough to understand without having a really big set of things that you need to change.
Yeah, one thing is this like the last conversation. I don't want to derail the meeting too much with.
There's technically
Those
two more
questions.
things on triage, but I think we're
Okay.
getting pretty low on time.
Yeah, I
anyway.
think this is probably
probably
reasonable.
it.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
but because I just want to say, and maybe we follow up on Slack or something, like this generally makes sense. Like reading this, I think that these seem to make sense. As an implementation, one thing that we're at least looking into is we already have policies, right? So we have, I think, basically 10 policy APIs. We want to move these to the policy attachment shape so that we can be conformant. Doing it in the direct mode is very nice because then we just have to add a field to the top level of our APIs. We don't have to move everything under defaults and overrides. But we already have a hierarchy actually, so it's kind of funky. So that's not necessarily a blocker or anything. I think what you've said makes sense. It's just like I struggle on how we will implement this in Istio personally. But that's not necessarily a blocker. So
yeah, it's on me. I'm sorry, man. This thing is too long.
No, it makes sense. I'll think that through. Like if you had, I almost want to say like if you have direct and you apply it to multiple parts in the hierarchy, it's implementation specific, but that's probably too wonky. So yeah, I may follow up with you. But
yeah. We can talk about it more after this meeting. But I think for everyone else, like I said, if anyone else does have problems with policy attachment, like this is the time. Like otherwise, this is gonna if you don't say anything now, then you're gonna miss out. So speak now or forever hold your peace.
One other thing on TLS too is, you could argue that you want to set min TLS version at the gateway level or something. So even that one, which was the canonical direct reference, it may not necessarily be so simple.
Yes. I think I have a TLS connection policy in the PR as an example. I might change that to be not TLS connection policy and do something else as well to avoid. Thanks, Mikhail. That's a good point. I might swap that out for something else for a different example. Try and find something that's more unambiguously direct.
I'd argue there's probably not that many things that are only ever useful as direct, but that doesn't mean it's not useful as a simplification. There's no resource CPU default in Kubernetes at a namespace level or something. That's you have to put it on every deployment. So sometimes it's fine. So we don't need this for every use case, obviously, but probably every policy you could be like, I want that at the global level, actually. So
So I'm hoping that that people will sort of have a crack at this and be like, oh, actually, no, a lot of the time you do need hierarchy. I do think that the direct one is probably going to be more useful for very small hierarchy or non-existent hierarchies, or for things like specific mesh use cases where you really want it just to connect to a specific thing. Yeah, but I think that my gut feeling, and the reason why I had pushed really hard to have hierarchical, is that most things you want to have be a policy, you're going to end up wanting them to be hierarchical. Sorry, I'll shut up now, Shane.
It's okay. The clock is not meant to be mean. It's just
No, I know. It's more like
it is time. We're at the top of the hour. So
Yeah.
if you have more conversations, this isn't necessarily the end of the road. We can continue to iterate on this PR, but it is 15:65. Thank you all for your time this week. We will see you next week at the same time.
Yeah.